10 upstanding men gathered in my living room every Saturday. "Entertainment hour," my father announced when my mother left. For years, I was their plaything while they broke me piece by piece. But small lenses have big eyes, and technology was the weapon they never saw coming. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my dear friends. How are you all doing? I hope you're feeling cozy wherever you are, because today I want to share a story I've carried in my heart for many years. My name is Martha Johnson. I'm 71 years old, and I currently live here in Bakersfield, California, a city that welcomed me when I most needed peace. Today, my life is quite peaceful. Every morning, after my coffee with carnation milk, a delicious recipe I learned from a neighbor here, I go to my little photography corner. I have a small improvised studio in the back room where I keep my cameras. Some old, others more modern, each with its own story. The analog cameras are my favorites, especially that Rolleiflex from the 60s that I restored myself. Photography is something I learned to value because through lenses, I found a way to see beauty where I once only saw pain. I started this passion for cameras when I worked in an electronics store for over 20 years. At first, I knew nothing about photography. My first photo came out all blurry and dark. I was devastated, but then I thought, Martha, you've faced much worse things in life. A bad photograph isn't going to defeat you. So I began to study, got books from the local library, watched tutorials, and kept learning. Today, I know every button, every setting, every secret to capturing the perfect moment. Each photo I take is like recording a little piece of the present that will someday become memory. On Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, I give photography workshops to a group of young people here in the neighborhood. We gather in my backyard when the sun isn't too harsh, drink chamomile tea that I buy at the farmer's market, and we sit there, talking about photographic techniques while practicing with the cameras. Teaching photography is therapeutic, you know? Each click is like a little piece of myself that transforms into art through someone else's eyes. Oh, and before I continue, I'd like to ask you all a small favor. If you enjoy my story, please hit the like button and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. This helps our message reach more people. And tell me in the comments, which town or city are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Let me know, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I'm going to tell you a story about how sometimes justice arrives in ways we never imagined. About how, even when we're alone and with no way out, God places tools in our path that can change everything. The story I'm going to tell happened to me at a time when I was just a girl who lived in fear of her own home. A time when I couldn't imagine that one day I would be here, talking to you, with peace in my heart and cameras in my hands. My story begins in Lancaster, a small town in Pennsylvania, where I was born and spent my childhood and youth. A town where everyone knew each other and where appearances were very deceiving. Behind Sunday church smiles and handshakes, there were secrets no one could imagine. And the biggest one was inside my own home. I was born in Lancaster in 1954. It was a very different time from today. Our house was on a dirt road in the Pine Hill neighborhood, a little away from downtown. It was a simple house, but large. It had a front porch with a wooden bench where my grandfather Ernest liked to sit on Sunday afternoons to smoke his pipe and watch the world go by. The house was painted light blue on the outside, with white wooden windows that creaked when the strong wind hit. My father's name was Alfred Johnson, a tall man with broad shoulders and an always furrowed brow. He worked as a merchant, owned a hardware store that was well known in town. Everyone respected my father. He was what they called a man of his word. If he said he was going to do something, he really did it. If he said he would deliver an order on Tuesday, you could expect it to be there on Tuesday. My mother, Grace Johnson, was a petite woman, with her hair always tied in a low bun. She took care of the house and us. She had small but strong hands from working so much. She could embroider like no one else and made the best apple pies in Pennsylvania, everyone said. There were 4 of us siblings. I was the oldest, then came Everett, 2 years younger than me, then Cynthia, who was born when I was 5, and finally Thomas, who arrived when I was already 8. Our house was always full of noise, running around, and laughter. At least during the day, when my father wasn't around. At night, when he arrived, we lowered our voices. "Respect," my mother would say, but today I know it was really fear. Our routine was simple. We woke up early, with the neighbor's rooster crowing. We had coffee with milk and homemade bread that my mother baked twice a week. Then we went to school. Everett and I went together on foot. It was about a 20-minute walk. The school was a yellow 2-story building with a dirt courtyard in the middle where we played during recess. I remember there was a huge oak tree in that yard, and in the fall we would line up to collect the acorns that fell. After school, I'd go home for lunch. My mother always had something tasty waiting: meatloaf, mashed potatoes, some meat when possible, and always vegetables from the garden we had in the backyard. After lunch, I helped with the dishes and took care of my younger siblings while my mother rested a bit or tended to the garden. In the afternoons, we played in the large backyard we had. It was a yard with red clay soil with some fruit trees: apple, cherry, peach. There was also a chicken coop in the back. Our favorite game was playing house. We used fallen fruit as if it were food and large leaves as plates. We also played hide and seek, tag, and ring around the rosy. Sometimes the neighbors would come to play too: Josephine, Anthony, Lucy. We ran, jumped, climbed trees. I remember coming back to the house with feet red from clay, and my mother would scold me, but it wasn't real scolding. She laughed while she complained. In the late afternoon, it was bath time and then helping my mother with dinner. We had a large kitchen with a wood stove where my mother cooked. The smell of that kitchen, my God, how I remember. Beans cooking slowly, herbs being chopped, sometimes a cornbread in the oven. It was a smell of comfort, you know. The kitchen was the heart of our home. When my father arrived, around 7 at night, the house changed. We spoke more quietly, sat properly at the table, couldn't put our elbows on it. He wasn't one for much conversation. He asked how school had been, if we had behaved, and we always answered yes, even when we had been up to some mischief. After dinner, we sat in the living room to listen to the radio. My father liked the news, and sometimes he let us listen to a music program afterward. The living room had a 2-seater sofa covered with a floral fabric, 2 wooden chairs, and the radio was on a small table in the corner. The walls had a few pictures, one of Jesus, another with a mountain landscape. At bedtime, my mother took us to our rooms. I shared a room with Cynthia, and the boys slept in another. Our room was simple, with 2 twin beds, a dark wooden wardrobe, and a small vanity where we kept our few trinkets: hair ribbons, some colored pencils, a rag doll that my grandmother had made. The window overlooked the backyard, and on warm summer nights, we left it open to let in a breeze. Before going to sleep, my mother always told us a story or prayed with us. She knew many ghost stories, about the headless horseman, about the Jersey Devil, and we loved having a little good fear before sleeping. On weekends, the routine changed a little. On Saturday morning, we went to the farmer's market with my mother. It was a feast of colors and smells. That market had everything: fruits, vegetables, herbs, meats, cheeses, sweets. My mother knew all the vendors and always stopped to chat a bit with each one. We would return loaded with bags and with some treat she bought for us. Sometimes a piece of fudge, sometimes an orange. On Sunday, we went to Mass at St. Benedict's Church. It was a large church with white walls and a bell that rang beautifully. After Mass, sometimes we would visit my grandmother, Carmela, my father's mother, who lived near downtown. She made a special lunch when we went, always fried chicken with biscuits, which was the typical food of the region. After lunch, my father and grandfather played cards, while we played in her little yard or helped clean up the kitchen. In those days in Lancaster, life was simpler, but also harder in many ways. People lived closer to each other. Everyone knew about everyone else's life. This had its good side. We always had help when we needed it. But it also had its bad side. Secrets were hard to keep, and problems inside the house often stayed right there. No one interfered. It was in this Lancaster of dirt roads, 4th of July parties with bonfires and hot cider, of processions during Holy Week, that I spent my childhood. A childhood that, seen from the outside, seemed like that of any other girl of the time. But within the walls of our light blue house with white windows, things weren't always as they seemed. Because on Sundays, after church, when the neighbors thought we were at home resting, something different began. Something that, for many years, I thought was normal, that happened in every home. Only much later did I discover that it wasn't. It was on Sundays that the meetings began. My father brought his friends, respected men from town, like him. The pharmacy owner, the bank manager, the lawyer, the county commissioner all came. My mother and my siblings would leave, go visit an aunt, and I stayed. "She needs to learn to be a good hostess," my father would say. And so, when I was just 11 years old, something began that would change my life forever. I remember as if it were yesterday the Sunday when it all really began. It was June 1965. I had just turned 11. Winter in Lancaster wasn't very harsh, but that day it was especially cold. My mother had taken my siblings to Aunt Ursula's house, as happened every Sunday after church. "Martha, your father wants you to stay to help serve the guests," she said, with that worried look that I only understood many years later. My father received 8 friends that day. They were all men of respect in town. Mr. Juvenile, the pharmacy owner, Dr. Clovis, the lawyer, Mr. Ananias, the bank manager, Mr. Benedict, the county commissioner, Mr. Oswald, the store owner, Dr. Quirino, the doctor, Mr. Theodore, the gas station owner, and Mr. Durval, the sheriff. They were all well dressed, with slacks and button-down shirts, even though it was Sunday. Some arrived by car, which was rare at that time in Lancaster. The table in the living room was prepared for a poker game. Green tablecloth, new decks of cards, a large ashtray in the center. My father introduced me as the hostess and asked me to serve the coffee that was already ready in the kitchen. I served each of them, head down, as my father had taught me. "A well-educated girl doesn't look directly into men's eyes," he always said. The men thanked me, some with a smile that, today I know, was not just politeness. "Sarah is becoming quite the young lady, Alfred," said Mr. Benedict, the commissioner. I noticed he called me Sarah, not Martha, but I remained silent. "It's true. We are lucky to have such a flower in our house," my father replied, with a pride in his voice that I had never heard before. At the time I didn't understand, but that had been the beginning of everything. They gave me another name. To them, I wasn't Martha, Alfred's daughter. I was Sarah, a character they invented. I went back to the kitchen and stayed there for a while, listening to the sound of chips, laughter, glasses being placed on the table. After an hour, maybe more, my father called me. "Come here, Sarah." That name again. When I entered the room, the game seemed to have stopped. Everyone was looking at me. "My daughter, these men are my trusted friends. Each of them is important in this town and can help our business a lot. You know that things aren't easy at the store, and we need to ensure that our friends continue to support us. Understand?" I nodded, even without fully understanding. My father's hardware store was always full. There didn't seem to be any problems. "Now I want you to show that you are a good girl and that you know how to entertain guests well. Today will be a test. If you pass, you'll get a special gift. If not..." He didn't complete the sentence, but his look chilled me inside. That's when what they called Saturday session began, even though it happened on Sundays. First, they asked me to serve drinks, no more coffee, but whiskey that my father kept in a special cabinet. Then, when everyone was happier with the drink, they started what they called the game. "Sarah, come to the center of the room," ordered my father. The tone left no room for disobedience. I stood there, in the center of the circle formed by the 9 men, trembling, not knowing what to expect. "Now, You're going to show our friends how a good girl behaves. First, you're going to listen and obey. Mr. Juvenile, the pharmacist, started. Sarah, stand on one foot and count to 30. I did what he asked, wobbling a bit, while they laughed. Now, hop like a frog to the wall and back, ordered another. And so it went for almost an hour, absurd, humiliating orders, while they laughed and drank more. When I thought it was over, my father took an old slipper from the cabinet. Now comes the final part of the test, Sarah. You know that disobedient girls need to be corrected, don't you? I didn't quite understand what he meant. I had never been hit with a slipper before. My mother sometimes gave a little slap on the hand when we misbehaved, but nothing beyond that. Now you're going to get 5 slaps with this slipper, one from each man here except me, to learn that you must always obey. My eyes filled with tears. But Father, I didn't disobey. That doesn't matter, he cut me off. What matters is that you learn the lesson even before you need it. One by one, those respected men of Lancaster gave me slaps while I cried silently. It wasn't a violent beating. They were more interested in humiliation than physical pain. The worst came afterwards. Mr. Benedict suggested the grand finale. Now the final touch, for the lesson to be complete. They took me to my room, where they ordered me to lie on the bed. I thought I could finally rest, but then I saw Mr. Oswald enter with a steaming kettle. "Hot water for the little princess's bed," he said with a cruel smile. They poured the water on my mattress, soaking everything, destroying the only place where I felt safe. "For you to remember this lesson every time you go to sleep," explained my father, as if it were something normal, something educational. When everyone left, I was alone in the room, with the soaked mattress smelling of mildew. I had to sleep on the floor that night. When my mother returned with my siblings, it was already late. I heard my father tell her that I had spilled water on the bed by accident. She seemed to believe it, or maybe she just pretended to believe it. The following Sunday, it happened again, and the next, and the next. The Saturday session became a weekly routine. The humiliations got worse, more elaborate. The slipper continued, the hot water too. Sometimes they made me stand in the center of the room for hours, just standing there, while they played and ignored me, only to later tell me how insignificant I was. I learned to mentally disconnect during those afternoons. My body was there, obeying the absurd orders, enduring the humiliations, but my mind wandered far away. I imagined I was somewhere else, that I was someone else. I dreamed of the day when I would be big enough to leave. At school, no one suspected anything. I was Mr. Alfred's daughter, a quiet and obedient girl. At home, during the week, everything seemed normal. My father was the same serious man as always, rarely speaking to me beyond what was necessary. It was as if that other man, the Sunday one, was a completely different person. My mother must have suspected something was wrong. I changed. I became more quiet, more withdrawn. I stopped playing in the yard with friends. I preferred to be alone, reading the few books we had, or just looking out the window. She once asked me if anything was happening, but fear prevented me from speaking. Fear and shame. Those Sunday afternoons destroyed me inside, piece by piece. It went on like this for years, years in which each weekend brought a new terror. I was trapped in a cycle that seemed to have no end until a small ray of hope appeared where I least expected it. Those Sunday sessions continued for 6 long years. From a girl, I was becoming a young woman with a body and soul marked by those weekly rituals. When I turned 17 in 1971, I was no longer the same person. In fact, I lived as if I were 2 different people. Martha, who went to school, helped at home, took care of her siblings, and Sarah, that name I hated, who appeared on Sundays to be the entertainment for the good men of Lancaster. With each passing year, the humiliations became more elaborate. They realized that the slipper and hot water no longer affected me as before. My body had gotten used to the pain, and I was already sleeping with towels hidden under the mattress to absorb the water. So they started inventing new games. One was what they called statue. I had to stand still in the center of the room without moving while they played cards. If I moved, even if just to scratch my nose, I was punished. At first, the punishment was to stand longer. Then they started throwing cold water on me, saying it was to refresh the statue. There were times I stayed like this for 3 hours, with my legs trembling from tiredness, my body aching, but I couldn't show weakness. Another terrible game was what they called the school. Mr. Clovis, the lawyer, was the one who liked this the most. He brought difficult questions about history, math, literature, things I had no way of knowing. When I got it wrong, which was inevitable, I had to repeat humiliating phrases. I'm stupid, I'm good for nothing, I'm the family's shame. If I cried or refused, the punishment was worse. Over time, I created a technique to survive those afternoons. The moment I heard the cars arriving, I closed a door inside my mind. I left my body there, obeying, while my soul fled far away. I imagined beautiful places, scenes from books I had read, dreams of a different life. That's how I managed to endure for so long without going completely mad. My mother never spoke directly about it, but I realized that she also suffered. Gradually she faded, becoming more quiet, more subservient. Her eyes, which once had a cheerful sparkle, became opaque, distant. I think she knew, or at least suspected, but she was as trapped as I was in that situation. My father wasn't a violent man with her, at least not physically. But he had absolute power over our house, our life. The worst of all wasn't the physical humiliation, but what it did to my mind. I began to believe what they said, that I was worthless, that I should be grateful they were educating me, that a girl like me didn't deserve respect. The self-esteem I had was being destroyed day after day, Sunday after Sunday. At school, my grades began to fall. I couldn't concentrate in class. My mind always wandered far away. The teachers said I had changed, that before I was a dedicated student, and now I always seemed absent. No one asked why. Or if they did, I lied, said everything was fine, just tired. One teacher, Mrs. Martha, tried to talk to me a few times. I think she suspected something was wrong, but I was too afraid to speak. The childhood friends, Josephine, Anthony, Lucy, gradually drifted away. I don't blame them. I distanced myself, avoided talking, refused invitations to birthday parties or outings. The shame was so great that I was sure everyone could see it, that it was written on my forehead what happened on those Sunday afternoons. My siblings also noticed the change. Everett, who was only 2 years younger, once asked me directly, "What happens when we go to Aunt Ursula's house and you stay home?" I lied, said I helped Dad with the store accounts. He didn't believe it. I saw it in his eyes, but he didn't insist either, perhaps out of fear of knowing the truth. The isolation grew. It was as if an invisible wall had been built between me and the world. I lived in a bubble of shame and fear. At night, I had terrible nightmares. I woke up sweating, screaming sometimes, but muffled the scream with the pillow so as not to wake Cynthia, who continued to share the room with me. At 17, already in my last year of high school, I began to think of ways to escape. I had saved a little money that I earned doing small sewing jobs for neighbors. It wasn't much, but maybe it would be enough for a bus ticket to Philadelphia. I could look for work there, start a new life, away from that horror. The problem was that I didn't know anyone in the city, had nowhere to stay, and the fear of the unknown was almost as great as the fear of what I already knew. It was at that time, when desperation was already consuming me, that something happened that changed everything. On an ordinary weekday, walking through the central square after school, I saw an advertisement in a store window. Salesperson wanted for electronics store, part-time hours, ask for Mr. Milton. That ad seemed to have been placed there especially for me. I had never been very interested in electronics, but the idea of working part-time, earning my own money, having a reason to leave home, was like a ray of light in the middle of darkness. I entered the store, trembling with nerves, and spoke with Mr. Milton, a gentleman in his 60s, with white hair and thick glasses. To my surprise, he hired me on the spot. "You seem to be a serious and responsible young lady," he said. If he knew the irony of those words. I started the next day. The work was simple: serving customers, organizing merchandise, taking orders. The store sold a bit of everything: radios, record players, small appliances, and, what fascinated me most, cameras. Mr. Milton noticed my interest in cameras and began to teach me about them, how they worked, the different types, how to develop film. He had a passion for the subject and found in me an eager student to learn. Those afternoons in the store, learning about photography, became my refuge, my escape from the cruel reality I lived at home. The most incredible thing is that my father allowed me to work. I think for him it was a way to show his friends that he was educating his daughter well to be a worker. Little did he know that that job would be the beginning of the end of the nightmare. After a few months at the store, I began to understand more about electronic equipment. One day, a novelty arrived that caught my attention: small surveillance cameras that Mr. Milton was trying to sell to stores and offices. "They're expensive, but very efficient," he explained to customers. "They can be hidden anywhere and record everything." It was as if a light had turned on in my head. An idea began to form, a crazy, dangerous idea, but one that could be my salvation. What if I could record what happened on those Sundays? If I had proof of what those good men did to me? I began to study those cameras in secret. I read the manuals when the store was empty, asked casual questions to Mr. Milton, learned everything I could about how to install them, how to hide them, how to ensure they worked without being noticed. Gradually, I saved every penny I earned. I lived with the minimum, didn't buy clothes, didn't go anywhere, saved everything. My plan was to buy at least 3 of those cameras: one for the living room, where most of the humiliations happened, one for my room, where they poured the hot water, and maybe one for the hallway, to capture them entering and leaving. It was a risky plan. If my father or any of those men discovered it, I can't even imagine what they would do to me. But desperation gave me courage. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to try something, anything, to get out of that situation. And so, at 17, working in a small electronics store in Lancaster, I found a possibility of liberation. A possibility that came through small lenses that could, finally, show the truth hidden behind the walls of our blue house. It took me almost 5 months to save enough money to buy the cameras. 5 months of terrible Sundays, of increasingly worse humiliations, of sleepless nights. Mr. Milton, without knowing it, helped me. He began to give me small commissions for the sales I made, especially of more expensive equipment like the surveillance cameras themselves. Irony of fate. When I finally gathered the money, I faced another problem: how to buy the cameras without raising suspicions? I couldn't simply buy them at the store where I worked. Mr. Milton would certainly ask what I wanted them for, and I didn't have a convincing explanation. Besides, if my father found out, everything would be lost. The solution came through Lydia, a store customer who became a kind of friend. She was about 10 years older than me, worked as a secretary in an accounting office, and frequently came to buy small equipment for her boss. One day, I took courage and asked for her help. I didn't tell the complete truth, of course. I just said I needed cameras for a personal project and that I didn't want my father to know, as it was a surprise. Lydia believed me, or pretended to believe me. She bought the cameras for me in Philadelphia during a business trip. 3 micro cameras, small enough to be hidden, but powerful enough to capture everything. They cost almost all my saved money, but every penny was worth it if my plan worked. Hiding the cameras at home was another challenge. I decided to place them inside common objects. The first, I hid inside a picture frame in the living room, behind the photo of my first communion. The second, I installed in my room, inside a rag doll that was on the shelf. The third, the most difficult, I placed inside a small religious picture in the hallway that led to the living room, directed to capture who entered and left. I spent an entire week working on this, taking advantage of the moments when I was alone at home. The fear of being discovered was constant. Every noise made me jump. Every door that opened made my heart race. But determination was greater than fear. I knew this could be my only chance. The most complicated part was the recording. These cameras needed to be connected to a recording device, and I had no way to hide a large piece of equipment. Mr. Milton, inadvertently, gave me the solution. The store had received some portable tape recorders, the size of a large book. I bought one with the last money I had, adapted the connections as I had learned at the store, and hid the device under a loose board in the floor of my wardrobe. Everything was ready for the next Sunday. Anxiety consumed me. What if it didn't work? What if the cameras didn't capture enough? What if the image quality was too poor? And most frightening, what if they discovered? That week was the longest of my life. In moments of doubt, I wondered if it wouldn't be better to simply run away. Take a bus to New York, to Los Angeles, to anywhere far from there. But something inside me wanted justice. Not just to escape, but to make them pay for what they had done, to make sure they could never do the same to another girl. When Sunday came, I woke up before the sun rose. I checked all the cameras, making sure they were working. The recorder was hidden with new tapes ready to record everything. My mother, as always, prepared to take my siblings to Aunt Ursilia's house. Before leaving, she looked at me differently, as if she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Could she suspect that something was about to change? "Everything will be fine, Mom," I said, trying to sound casual. She nodded slightly and left with my siblings. I was left alone, waiting. The hours dragged on. Each minute seemed an eternity. Finally, I heard the cars arriving. It was time to face another session of humiliation, but this time, with one crucial difference, everything would be recorded. That Sunday was worse than all the previous ones. Maybe because I was more conscious, more present. I couldn't mentally disconnect as I used to do. I needed to ensure that the cameras captured everything. Or maybe because, instinctively, they felt that something was different, that there was an invisible threat in the air. The game began as always, with the statue, the impossible questions, the degrading phrases. But then Mr. Benedict, the commissioner, suggested something new. "Let's see if Sarah has learned to be a real hostess," he said with a smile that chilled me to the bone. The others laughed, understanding something that I, in my innocence, still didn't fully comprehend. It was at that moment that I realized things were about to go beyond the usual humiliations, beyond the slippers and the hot water. Their look had changed. It was no longer just cruel fun. It was something darker, more threatening. My father also noticed, and to my surprise, hesitated. "I don't think it's time for that yet," he said, in a tone that mixed authority and nervousness. "Sarah still needs to learn some more basic lessons first." "Come on, Alfred," replied Mr. Oswald, the store owner. "She's already 17. She's practically a woman. It's time to learn other things." A silent debate seemed to happen between them, communicating only with looks. Finally, my father yielded, but with a condition. "Just the basics today. No exaggerations." It was then that Mr. Juvenile, the pharmacist, stood up and came towards me. His eyes had a gleam I had never seen before. Mr. Clovis, the lawyer, also approached. "We're going to teach you to be a real woman, Sarah," said Juvenile, holding my arm firmly. In that instant, something inside me exploded, a panic so intense that it overcame even the fear I felt of them. For the first time in 6 years, I reacted. I pulled my arm with all my strength, pushing Juvenile away. "No!" I screamed with a voice that didn't seem like mine. "My name is Martha." The silence that followed was absolute. Everyone looked at me with astonishment. Never in all those years had I resisted. Never had I raised my voice. Never had I refused to follow orders. Their surprise quickly turned to anger. My father was the first to react. He stood up, his face red with fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he growled, advancing toward me. The slipper was already in his hand, but this time I wasn't going to submit. I ran to my room, locking the door behind me, something I had never dared to do before. "Open this door now," he shouted, hitting it so hard that the wood seemed like it would give way. The other men joined him, shouting threats, swear words, promises of what they would do to me when the door opened. I was shaking so much I could barely stand. My plan had been ruined. The cameras were recording, yes, but I hadn't counted on this explosion, this break in the ritual. Now they knew I was resisting, and that only increased the danger. The door began to crack under the blows. It wouldn't hold much longer. In desperation, I looked for something to defend myself with. My eyes fell on a sewing scissors that my mother had given me. I grabbed it, holding it in front of my body like a weapon. When the door finally gave way, they entered like a violent wave. My father in front, followed by Juvenal and Oswald. Seeing me with the scissors, they momentarily stopped. "Have you lost your mind, girl?" asked my father, but there was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. He had never seen me like this, determined, ready to fight. "If you come any closer, I swear I'll use this," I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "And then I'll tell everything you do to me on Sundays, to the entire town." They laughed, but it was a nervous laugh. "And who would believe you?" taunted Mr. Benedict. "We are respected men. You're just a hysterical girl." It was then that I made the fatal mistake. In the heat of the moment, in the adrenaline of the confrontation, I said too much. "I have proof. It's all recorded." The silence that followed was deafening. I saw in their eyes the slow and terrible understanding of what I had just revealed. My father was the first to fully understand. His gaze ran through the room, searching until it stopped on the doll on the shelf. "What is this story about recording?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. Too late, I realized my mistake. I had revealed my only weapon, my only advantage. Now they would search, find the cameras, destroy the evidence, and then I would be truly lost. That was the darkest moment of my life. Trapped in a room with 9 furious men, a broken door that no longer protected me, and the certainty that my plan had just collapsed because of a single moment of loss of control. But sometimes, in the darkest moments, an unexpected light appears. And that's exactly what happened on that Sunday afternoon that changed my life forever. When I thought all was lost, when I saw my father advancing toward the doll where one of the cameras was hidden, something happened that I never imagined possible. The front door of the house opened with a bang, and a female voice shouted, "Martha, are you home?" It was Lydia, the secretary who had helped me buy the cameras. Later, I discovered that she had suspected something was wrong. My vague excuses about the cameras, my nervousness, my barely disguised desperation, all of this had left her worried. That Sunday, she decided to stop by the house by chance, to see if everything was okay. The sound of an unexpected voice of someone from outside the circle caused an immediate confusion. The men moved away from me, looking at each other in panic. "There's someone here," whispered Mr. Clovis, as if it wasn't obvious. "It's a friend of mine from work," I replied, with a confidence I didn't feel. "And she's not alone." This last part was a lie, but they had no way of knowing. The fear of being discovered was visible on their faces. 9 good men, locked in a room with a 17-year-old girl, a broken door, an atmosphere of violence. There was no innocent way to explain that. "Martha?" Lydia's voice was getting closer. My father made a desperate gesture to the others. "Go out through the back," he ordered in a low voice. "I'll deal with this." He turned to me, his eyes full of threat. "This isn't over. We'll talk more later." Then, quickly composing a neutral expression, he left the room to intercept Lydia. While the other men hurriedly left through the back, I heard my father inventing a story for Lydia. Something about helping me fix a shelf that fell, that's why the noise. She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't insist either. She asked if she could see me, and surprisingly, my father allowed it. When Lydia entered the room and saw my state, trembling, holding scissors with finger marks on my arm where Juvenile had grabbed me, her eyes widened. She was smart enough not to show shock in front of my father, who was watching from the door. "I came to bring you that book you asked me for," she said casually, taking a random book out of her bag. Then, lowering her voice so only I could hear, she added, "Do you need help? Blink twice if yes." I blinked, deliberately, twice. She nodded almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Johnson, can I take Martha for ice cream? I wanted to talk to her about a project at work." Her naturalness was impressive. My father hesitated, visibly divided. On one hand, he didn't want to let me go, especially after what had happened. On the other, refusing could raise even more suspicions. "Sure," he finally agreed, with a forced smile. "But don't be long, Martha. Your mother and your siblings will be back soon for dinner." It was a veiled threat. He was telling me to come back, not to do anything stupid. And at that moment, obedience was so deeply rooted in me that I almost considered obeying. But Lydia didn't give me time to hesitate. She took my hand and practically dragged me out. "Don't worry, Mr. Johnson. I'll bring her back in an hour," she promised, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. As soon as we got into her small car, the appearances fell. "What's going on, Martha? Who are those men leaving through the back of your house? Why are you shaking like this?" Between sobs, I told her everything. Not the edited version I had planned to tell someday, but the raw, terrible truth. The Sunday sessions, the years of abuse, the hidden cameras, the confrontation that day. Lydia listened to it all in silence, her face getting paler and paler. "My God, Martha," she finally said. This is monstrous. We have to go to the police." "No," I exclaimed in panic. "One of them is the police. Mr. Durval, the sheriff. They would never believe me." Lydia thought for a moment. The car parked on a deserted street where we had stopped to talk. "The recordings," she finally said. "You said you have everything recorded, right?" I nodded, but then reality hit me. "But they're at home, in my room, and my father is probably already looking for them." "Where exactly?" Lydia's determination surprised me. "Under a loose board at the bottom of the wardrobe, the recorder and the tapes. The cameras are hidden in a picture frame in the living room, in my rag doll, and in a religious picture in the hallway." Lydia thought for a moment. "We have to recover these proofs before your father finds them." She looked at the clock. "He said your mother and siblings would return for dinner. What time is that normally?" "Around 7. We still have almost 3 hours." "It's not enough time to go to the next town and back," muttered Lydia, more to herself than to me. Then she looked at me with determination. "I know someone who can help us, someone we can trust." That someone was Ottavio, Lydia's brother, who worked as a reporter for the small Lancaster newspaper. Lydia explained to me that he had been denouncing local corruption, but had never gotten concrete proof against the town's powerful people. He would be more than willing to help us. We went to Ottavio's house, which was on the outskirts of town. He listened to our story with the same shock as his sister, but with an extra pinch of journalistic anger. These scoundrels. I always knew they were rotten inside, but this is a new level of rottenness. Together, we developed a plan. Ottavio had a friend, Romero, who was an electrician and had master keys that he used for services in homes. They would meet us near my house. While Lydia took me back, as promised to my father, Ottavio and Romero would enter through the back, where there was a window that was always unlocked, the kitchen one. They would recover the recorder and the tapes, and if possible, the cameras too. It was risky. If they were caught, they would be accused of breaking in. If my father had already found the evidence, it would all be in vain. But we had no other option. Lydia took me back, exactly as she promised. My father was on the porch waiting, with that false cordiality that I knew so well. "Thank you for bringing her back on time, Miss Lydia," he said. His eyes, however, said something else. They said I would pay dearly later. I entered the house with my heart in my throat. The plan was for me to distract my father while Otavio and Romero entered through the back. I started talking about work, about a difficult customer who had appeared at the store, anything to keep him in the living room with his back to the kitchen. With each passing minute, my anxiety increased. Had they already entered? Had my father found the evidence? Would everything work out? After 20 minutes that seemed like 20 hours, I heard a slight noise coming from the kitchen. My father heard it too. "What was that?" he asked, frowning. "Must be the wind," I replied, trying to sound casual. "The kitchen window usually bangs when it's windy." He didn't seem convinced and got up to check. My heart almost stopped. If he found Otavio and Romero. But then, as if sent by God, my mother arrived with my siblings. The noise of the door opening, the children's voices, the natural confusion of a family returning home. All of this diverted my father's attention. By the time he finally went to check the kitchen, Otavio and Romero had already left. Later, a note thrown through my bedroom window would confirm they had succeeded. They had the recorder, the tapes, and even 2 of the cameras. The one from the picture frame they couldn't take without drawing attention, but what they had was more than enough. That night was the longest of my life. I stayed awake, expecting the punishment that would surely come. But surprisingly, my father did nothing. He was strange, quiet, almost cautious. I realized he was worried. He didn't know exactly what I had, what evidence, nor what I planned to do with it. The next morning, Lydia met me on the way to school. "Everything is ready," she whispered. "Otavio checked the recordings. They're horrible, Martha. But they're more than enough proof. He wants to know what you want to do now." It was the question I had asked myself all night. What did I want to do? Part of me just wanted to flee, leave everything behind, never look back. Another part wanted justice, wanted those men to pay for what they had done, wanted to make sure they could never do this to another girl. "I want everyone to know," I finally replied. "I want all of Lancaster to know who these good men really are." And that's how the operation began, that would change not only my life, but the entire town of Lancaster. Otavio didn't want to wait even one more day. He put together a special report for the newspaper, with still images taken from the recordings, carefully edited not to expose me, but making it very clear who the men involved were and what they were doing. But he didn't stop there. He made copies of the tapes and sent them to larger newspapers in Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, and even New York. He also sent them to the FBI to prevent the case from being covered up by the local police, commanded by Mr. Durval. The bomb exploded on a Thursday morning when the newspapers arrived at the homes and businesses of Lancaster. I remember leaving for school and seeing people on the streets, in small groups, commenting on the news with expressions of shock and disgust. Some looked at me, recognizing me from the descriptions in the newspaper, although my name hadn't been revealed. Some looked away, perhaps ashamed for never having noticed or acted. Others nodded silently, as if offering late but sincere support. I didn't go to school that day. I went straight to Lydia's house, as we had arranged. Her parents, who already knew everything, received me with a tight hug and tears in their eyes. "You are safe here," said her mother. "No one will hurt you anymore." The consequences for the 9 men were devastating, as they should be. Mr. Durval, the sheriff, was the first to fall, immediately removed from office when the FBI arrived in town that same afternoon. The others followed. Mr. Benedict lost his commissioner position, Dr. Clovis was disbarred, Dr. Quirino had his medical license revoked. Some were arrested immediately, others tried to flee, but were captured. Only Mr. Oswald, the store owner, managed to escape and was never found again. There were rumors he had gone to Canada. My father couldn't bear the shame. On the morning of the day after the publication, before even being formally accused, he took his own life with a shot to the head in the warehouse of the hardware store. He left a short note. I cannot live with what I did. For years I carried that guilt of having caused my father's death. It took me a long time to understand that the choice had been his, as had been all the terrible choices he made during those years. He could have chosen to be a real father, but he decided to be a monster. And when his acts came to light, he decided to flee once again. For my mother and my siblings, it was a terrible shock. They didn't know anything, or at least that's what my mother always claimed. For a time, I thought she was lying, that it wasn't possible she didn't know. Today, I understand better. Sometimes, we don't want to see what's right in front of our eyes. Sometimes, fear blinds us. Sometimes, the mind protects itself by denying what is unbearable to accept. I don't blame her for that anymore. She was also a victim, in a different way. The trial of the men involved lasted almost a year. I had to testify, of course. It was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, having to relive all of that, detail by detail, in front of a judge, lawyers, and a courtroom full of people. But the recordings were there, corroborating every word of mine. One by one, those good men were convicted with long prison sentences. Not just for abuse and assault, but also for conspiracy, corruption of minors, and a list of other crimes that extended far beyond what they did to me. I couldn't continue in Lancaster, of course. The looks, the whispers, the mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, it was all unbearable. Some people even blamed me for the fall of the important men in town, as if I had seduced or provoked that situation. The small-town mentality can be ruthless, especially with victims. I went to live with Lydia and her family in Philadelphia, where I finished high school. During all this time, I continued working on my healing, seeing an incredible psychologist who helped me process the trauma and rebuild my self-esteem. It wasn't an easy path. I had nightmares, panic attacks, moments of deep depression. But step by step, day by day, I rebuilt myself. I took a technical course in electronics and, with Lydia and Ottavio's help, got a job in a larger store of photographic equipment. My passion for cameras and equipment, born of the most desperate need, became my profession and later my lifelong hobby. Today, looking back after more than 50 years, sometimes it seems like I'm remembering someone else's life. That frightened girl from Lancaster and I, this 71-year-old lady who takes care of her cameras in Bakersfield, seem like different people, and, in a way, we really are. I came to Bakersfield in 1980 when I was 26. I wanted a place where no one knew me, where I could just be Martha, not that girl from the scandal. I chose Bakersfield because it was a town in the interior, like Lancaster, but far enough away that the story wouldn't follow me. Besides, it was a growing city, with opportunities to open my own business. Here, I opened a small electronics repair shop that I kept until I retired 10 years ago. It wasn't anything grand. I fixed radios, televisions, cameras, and later computers. But it was mine, achieved through my own effort. In the beginning, many doubted that a woman could understand electronics. Some men would arrive at the store and ask for the technician. When I said it was me, they would turn around and leave. But those who stayed discovered that I knew what I was doing. Over time, I built a solid reputation, and the clientele grew. My specialty was always cameras. There were few people in inland California who knew how to repair and restore old photographic equipment, and soon photographers from all over the region began to seek me out. I restored cameras that seemed lost forever, fixed lenses that others had given up on as unrecoverable. It was more than a job, it was an art form, a way of preserving the history contained in those machines. Lydia and Ottavio continued to be an important part of my life. They visited me regularly, and I went to Philadelphia at least twice a year. Ottavio became a renowned journalist, working for a major national newspaper, and part of his success came from the report on my case. Lydia opened her own accounting firm and married Romero, the technician who helped us on that crucial day. They had 3 children, and I am godmother to one of them. My brother Everett came to visit me a few years after I settled in Bakersfield. It was an emotional meeting. We hadn't seen each other since the scandal. He told me that my mother had passed away 2 years earlier from a heart problem. He also told me that Cynthia and Thomas were fine, each following their own path. I offered him the chance to stay in Bakersfield, to start over as I had done, but he preferred to return to Philadelphia, where he had already established a family. We maintained sporadic contact through letters and phone calls, and today we talk online, although not as frequently as I would like. As for love, well, that took time. The traumas left deep marks. Trust didn't come easily to me, especially trust in men. I had some relationships, but I always ended up pulling away when intimacy got too great, until I met Carl, a math teacher at the local school. He was different, patient, gentle, respectful. He never pressured me, never made me feel like I owed him anything. We got married when I was 35. We had 20 wonderful years together until he passed away, victim of a heart attack, in 2009. Carl knew my whole story from the beginning. I told him before we even started dating because I thought he deserved to know what he was getting into. I remember his reaction. It wasn't one of horror or pity, but of deep indignation for what I had gone through and admiration for how I had survived. "You're the strongest person I've ever met," he told me that night, and I knew then that I had found someone who truly saw me. We didn't have biological children, another consequence of the traumas. The idea of pregnancy, of childbirth, caused me panic. But we adopted two, Simone, who is now 42 and lives in Seattle with her husband and 3 children, and Henry, who is 39, lives in San Francisco and works as an engineer. They are my joy, along with my 5 grandchildren who come to visit me whenever they can. Simone and Henry came into our lives like unexpected gifts. Simone was 7 when we adopted her, a quiet and distrustful girl who had gone through 2 foster homes before. Henry came 2 years later, at just 3 years old, a boy full of energy who transformed our house with his laughter. They brought healing to wounds I didn't even know were still open. Through them, I learned that family isn't the one we're born into, but the one we build with love. My home here in Bakersfield is simple but cozy. It has a garden in the back where I plant some herbs and vegetables. In what was Henry's room, I set up my small photography studio and workshop for restoring old cameras. I have a collection of more than 50 different cameras, from old models from the 50s to some more modern digital ones. My favorite is a Rolleiflex from 1960 that I completely restored. Every piece, every screw, every lens was cleaned and adjusted by my own hands. The photography workshops I give to the young people in the neighborhood are my way of keeping my mind active and passing on the knowledge I've accumulated. Seeing these young people discovering the magic of capturing moments through lenses brings me a joy that's hard to explain. Perhaps because, for me, cameras weren't just a hobby or a profession, they were my salvation. There's a lesson I always pass on to my students, one that I learned the hard way. An image can change everything. It can tell truths that words can't express. It can reveal what's hidden. It can give voice to those who don't have one. For them, it's just a lesson about photography. For me, it's the story of my life. Every now and then, someone from Lancaster seeks me out. Journalists wanting to do stories about the case, researchers studying domestic violence, even distant relatives of some of the men involved, seeking understanding or perhaps forgiveness. I rarely grant interviews and never offer absolution to those who have no right to ask for it. But I always receive young people who have gone through similar situations and seek guidance or simply someone who understands. For these, my door and my heart are always open. In 2015, I received an unexpected letter. It was from a man named Gabriel, the son of Mr. Juvenile, the pharmacist. He was only 5 years old when the scandal broke and his father was arrested. He grew up with his mother, who moved to New York afterward, and for years he believed the version she told, that his father had been the victim of a conspiracy, unjustly accused. It was only as an adult, researching on his own, that he discovered the truth. His letter was an apology, not for his father, but for having believed the lies for so long. We met once, here in Bakersfield. It was a difficult conversation, but an important one. He was seeking his own healing, trying to understand how the man he called father could have done such terrible things. I had no answers to give him, only the understanding that human evil can't always be explained, only confronted. Today, I can say I am a woman at peace. The memories are still there, of course. There are days when I wake up from a nightmare, cold sweating, reliving those terrible Sundays. But they are increasingly rare. I learned not to let the past define who I am today. I learned that we are much stronger than we imagine, and that even from the darkest experiences, a light can be born. My dear ones who have listened to me up to here, if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that darkness, no matter how dense, is never permanent. Even in the longest nights, the sun always rises again. My story is difficult, I know that. But I wanted to share it, not to cause sadness or horror, but to light a beacon of hope for those who are still in the dark. If you are going through something similar or know someone who is, I want you to know you are not alone. And more importantly, it's not your fault. It never was. The abuses we suffer don't define us, don't determine our worth. They are acts of other people, acts that speak about who they are, not about who we are. I learned that age doesn't define our strength, but rather our capacity to start anew each day. Each morning is a new chance, a blank page where we can write a different story. My wrinkles are maps of survival. Each one tells a story of pain overcome. And believe me, you can overcome too. Life taught me that even in the deepest darkness, our inner light never goes out. It may get weak, flickering, but it's there, waiting for someone to help it shine again. Sometimes that someone is a Lydia, a person who appears at the right moment. Sometimes it's a Carl, who shows us we can be loved for who we are. But in the end, that someone always needs to be yourself. Because true healing begins from the inside out. I never allowed my dignity to be stolen, even when they tried to take everything from me. In the darkest moments, when they thought they were breaking me, I was only getting stronger, gathering the pieces to one day rebuild myself stronger, and you can do that too. I discovered we are stronger than we imagine, especially when we think we can't take it anymore. It's precisely when we think we've reached our limit that we discover there's a reserve of strength within us that we didn't know existed. It's like that photo that seems ruined, but with the right chemicals and necessary time, reveals a beautiful and surprising image. Time doesn't heal all wounds, but it teaches us to live with them and still smile. My wounds are still here, inside me. They haven't completely disappeared. But I learned not to let them contaminate the present, poison the joys that life offers me now. Like a photograph that has some stains, but still captures the beauty of the moment. My story isn't about what they did to me, but about how I chose to respond. I could have drowned in anger, hatred, bitterness, and I would have had every right to. But I chose to live. I chose to create. I chose to love. It wasn't easy. Nothing worthwhile is easy. But it was the choice that truly freed me. I learned that true strength isn't in never falling, but in getting up every time. And believe me, I got up many times. After the scandal, after my father's death, after nightmares that woke me up screaming, after losing Carl, each time I thought I couldn't get up again. But I did. And you will too. Abuse leaves invisible scars, but recovery shows that we can flourish even after the storm. Like those flowers that grow in difficult terrain, among rocks, defying all odds. We are like that, capable of flourishing even in the most unlikely places, of finding light even in the densest shadows. I discovered that my voice, even trembling, has power when I decide to use it. For years I remained silent, believing that no one would hear me, that no one would believe me. But when I finally spoke, even with fear, even trembling, I discovered that my voice had more strength than I imagined. And your voice has too. My experience taught me that our story doesn't end in the painful chapters. There are still so many pages to be written, so many moments of joy and beauty to be lived. What happened to you is not the end of your story. It's just a part of it. I learned that surviving is a form of resistance, and living well is the best revenge. Each day I live with joy. Each moment I create happy memories with my family. Each photo I take celebrating the beauty of the world. All of this is my victory over those who tried to destroy me. And this is a victory that no one can take from me, or from you. Before we say goodbye, I have a special request to make. If this story touched your heart, if anything I said made sense to you, please share this video. Not for me, but for all the girls, boys, women, and men who are suffering in silence, trapped in cycles of abuse that seem to have no end. Sometimes, all we need to take the first step is to know that someone has walked this path before, that it is possible to reach the other side, that there is hope. Click like, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, and turn on the notification bell. This helps our message reach more people who may desperately need to hear it. Share it right now with someone you think might need a light at the end of the tunnel. Your action could literally save a life. And tell me in the comments a word that represents what you felt when hearing my story. It could be hope, courage, overcoming, or any other that touched your heart. I want to connect with you. I want you to know that I'm reading every comment, that we're together on this journey. Do this now. Don't wait even one more minute, because somewhere, someone is losing hope at this very moment, and your action can make all the difference. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you for giving me the chance to transform my pain into something that can help others. As I always say in my photography classes, the most beautiful light is the one that manages to pierce through darkness.